Good morning, it's day 68. This is part one. What I loved about doing the timeline yesterday in the first issue is I laid out a timeline, a proposed timeline, and then people like this GOP poll analyst, and I think she goes by the name of Katika, came in and really pulled all kinds of documents and really laid it out, the timeline with documentary evidence. And this is the great thing in one day. A lot of people said in one day you wouldn't get this in a law firm, in a year. It would just cost you so much money. But looking at some of the key dates that she brings out, one of the key new people in this sequence of events of Fusion GPS and this Fusion GPS timeline is this meeting between Lisa Page and James Baker. This is going to be the beginnings of the Trump dossier, which later will morph into the PP dossier. And the importance here is the basis of the Trump dossier, I believe, is this Russia, 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 and it has to do with Russian babies, Russian kids, Russian teenagers, Russian adoption. And that's the part that's lost here in the Trump dossier. It's all about Russian adoption. Now, it's very odd that just a few days later, 10 days later, Nellie Orr is hired, and she is not only the Russia expert, spending several years, decades there, I believe, and speaks perfect Russian, but she's also the Russian baby expert. She's the Russian teen expert. She's the Russian adoption expert. So it stands to reason that the genesis of the PP dossier, the baby PP dossier, if you will, which was the Trump dossier, the first given to Veselnitskaya to take on June 9th to Donald Trump Jr., was written by Nellie Orr. So if you go back to my timeline and you make these additions, there's a few things that move around, but one thing I've emphasized from yesterday is the close relationship and monitoring or following of Glenn Simpson and Mary Jacoby at the Washington Post. And remember, Washington Post, democracy dies in the shadows. So we really need to know if the PP dossier led to the PP FISA. I'm sure that we need to know that. And the second thing is, so that's been clearly established. But I'm going to skip over this Becerra server and all these illegal logins and so forth, and I'm going to really and kind of focus on this timeline here when DNC is hired by Fusion GPS. Now, I have documents that show there's an earlier relationship in March, where Perkins gets hired by the DNC, and then in April moves into hiring Fusion GPS. But we can argue about that. And I go back to how Manafort, Simpson, and Jacoby always just seem to be, Manafort's the next word in the sentence, just going by patterns. I believe they're hired, Simpson and Jacoby are hired by the DNC, and then Manafort shows up at Trump Tower, not the other way around. And I'm putting a causality there that may not be there. They may be two unrelated events, but I'm putting a causality in there. So the second piece here is there's this marathon meeting. Now, who knows if this meeting between Zebley, which is Justin Cooper's attorney, and Mueller, who knows if it's a defensive meeting or an offensive meeting? I think it's maybe now both. I think it's how do we put the kibosh on whatever Justin Cooper is saying here? How do we put that kibosh? And then turn it around on the opposition and accuse them of what Justin Cooper is accusing us of. Best defense is a good offense. So I'm now starting to think this is an offense-defense meeting right here between, let's take what Justin Cooper accuses us of, Zebley. You were my chief of staff at the FBI. Now let's turn it on the opposition. Let's turn it around. Let's hire Fusion GPS. Let's get a story going. Let's figure out a way of getting a FISA and turn this story around on Trump. So that's where I think this Jacoby meeting comes in at the White House, this long meeting where they strategize and they say, okay, here are our actors in this play. Here's how it will play out. And usually on a CNN, if you've noticed, there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 people that get brought in over a period of 1 or 2 days where they'll all say the same thing. Oh yes, it's clear now. It looks like Russian collusion. Oh yeah, from my perspective, yeah, it's Russian collusion. From my perspective too, I think they were in on those servers at the DNC. It's Russian collusion, and maybe all they were doing is taking the evidence here and taking the evidence from their own Russian spies that they hired and just giving it the twist of saying Russia, 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 and just erasing out the part about Maryland and erasing the part out about Centreville, Maryland. So the DNC supposedly waits to call Perkins Coie until April the 22nd when they notice they've been hacked. We know this is a lie. We know they've been sweeping money going back to the Bersera server. We know that they've had 7,000 sweeps. By now, at that period in April, they would have had 5,000 money sweeps and NGP van sweeps would have been done already. So we know this is a lie. And then we have Perkins Coie getting called in to cloth the servers. Okay, and now we get into things that have changed in the timeline. This is Comey's exoneration letter was already being drafted, so this gives more credence. I had this as the 20th of May yesterday. This gives credence to the, okay, let's get the defense out of the way, and let's get back to offense. Let's get back to offense. So 2 days later or 3 days later, this is this critical meeting. Hey, the defense is done. We've got the exoneration letter done. Now let's turn it around, and let's turn it over here and get Lisa Page, who was at the FBI, and all these DOJ lawyers in, and James Baker in, to figure out how are we going to construct a document which is going to get us a FISA. And this is what I said before with Judge Contreras coming on the FISA court in the 15th. I believe that there was a first FISA asked for based on the Trump Tower dossier, and I believe Judge Contreras, around the 15th or maybe a little bit later, turned it down. That's why they went to these other strategies of bringing in more spies from Europe. But anyway, here you go. Here's the 15th. They've had this meeting. They've decided what to do. They've got to get some kind of document to go to the FISA court. So they hire Nellie Orr. She's going to write this Russia, 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 adoption, adoption, adoption. I think this part has been underplayed on how much this was Russia, 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 but also adoption, adoption, adoption. And that's that document that comes to Trump Jr. And then we see Orr being hired here. I had this a little bit later on the 25th. It was actually earlier than I thought. So sometime between here, and I should change this, sometimes between the 15th and the 25th is when I say they go to the FISA court. Remember, as soon as they're done writing the document, her husband right over here works at the Department of Justice. They can walk it down the hall. They literally walk it across the street over to 333 Constitution and ask for a FISA. They can ask for it any time of day. So these things could have been bang, bang. So I'm just using these as brackets. Nellie Orr writes it. Bruce Orr takes it up to Contreras in this 15-day window sometime. And I'll keep flexible on that 15-day window. But again, it's the crowd. It's the crowdsource putting in this critical, pivotal link showing how, first of all, getting this date right on the exoneration when defense is over with. Okay, now we've put the letter in the drawer. We've done the edits to it. Hillary's not going to jail. Now let's turn it back on offense and then have this offense meeting the next day.